welcome. Thank you for being with us. Christine wanted to pop back on here too, because she just, she was excited to have you on and be a part of the conversation. So welcome. Thanks for being with us. And I was saying at the beginning of our show this morning, when we were talking about the different speakers that were coming on, that I was in your group and I was following some of your posts, and I'm just super curious. Scars matter. Transform your well-being by working with your scars. And yeah, you did a post, and I forget what it said, and I think it was last night, and it was something about your scar being connected to your well-being or something, and I was like, ooh, like it just, I couldn't wait for this conversation today. I was like, oh, how does that work? So yeah, welcome.
Before she starts, I just want to say, so we found each other through another business person in one of my masterminds that I was in. And as soon as I heard what her program was about and her group, I was like, this is so cool, because many people do have some shame around their scars. And we are so glad to have you. Kendra, you have the floor. Tell us your story. We love the story part because we feel people can really relate to that, and then how that moved you into what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. So thank you to both of you, Virginia and Christine, for having me. It's so nice to be here on a lovely Saturday morning. I am in Costa Rica, so to just spend some time with all of you. Beautiful. I'm in a place called Uvita. It's about 3-hour drive, from San Jose. Yeah.
I lived in Manuel Antonio for 4 years, and Virginia just moved back to Canada from Panama. So podemos hablar en español, entonces.
There we go. We got all Central American, all connection. Good, and I'm Canadian, so there we go. We're all connected. So my name is Kendra Toothill, and I'm a holistic women's health therapist, and I help women understand the power of the scars that they have on their body. I help them understand that the scars that they have meaning and significance, and we can trace all of that back, all of the physical challenges that people are experiencing, the emotion, the energetic kind of struggle, we can trace all of that back to the scar. And so my system, Scars Reigniting Your Feminine, is really about how we can unearth all of that and work with that in a transformational process. So my background is as a clinical therapist. I've been a clinical therapist for nearly a decade now. I started out working in sport. I was an athletic therapist, and I would do a real true Canadian hockey in the winter, rugby in the summer. And and it was really that journey that helped me recognize that it wasn't really deep work that I was wanting to do. And I was craving this meaningful kind of connection and powerful transformation that I wasn't really getting in the sport world. So just through my own personal transformation and through my professional transformation, I slowly started to just refine how I was working with people. And around the time when I was terribly unwell, and probably around 2015, my worst was 2016, my business world was awesome, but everything else was just falling apart. I had all of the mental health stuff going on, chronic pain, food intolerances, relationships down the tube, all of the sleep problems that people are experiencing, sleep paralysis in particular. And it was a challenge because I was living this kind of parallel life where I was really uncovering something that was really transformational, which was working with people's scars, recognizing that when I was working with people's scars, it was incredibly healing and powerful, and really kind of shocking at first. I have so many stories of all the amazing transformations that happened unexpectedly. So it's really over the years that I've refined how I work, and I help. One of the pieces that's so big is I help women understand what they're feeling has an answer. What you're going through, there's a reason why. And just that as a foundational piece is so transformative because it builds confidence. It gives you that sense that you're on your journey, you're on the way, you have an empowering process kind of behind you that's fueling you. And that is really just a process of walking yourself well over time. It's really this amazing process that kind of unfolds as we go.
That's so interesting. And so when you say you were working with people's scars, how did that come to you? Was it like intuitively you were picking up hits on, hey, like a connection, or how did that work?
So when I got out of university and I started just my professional career, I just dived in the most intense neurology courses. I was incredibly geeky and like Western oriented in that way. So I was doing all the courses and trying to pack my brain full of stuff, which I think eventually kind of got me in the end, because I was really trying to mind my way through life. And I was missing this embodiment piece that's really part of my system, like reconnecting with your body. So around that time, I was just learning so much about the nervous system and neurology and biomechanics. And there was pieces, like really small pieces of these courses about scars. But when I really started to dive into it, it was like, this is everything. Like everything that we're talking about can be worked in the context of scars. And it was really the kind of beginnings for me that led to me choosing to exclusively work with people who have physical scars.
That is just so cool. So
Yeah.
I don't want to like put anybody on the spot, but can you give us an example of what something like that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So I
use
tell
ours?
this story.
So I'll share. So Virginia had C-sections. So she has her scar on, she mentioned in the video this morning. And then I've had a breast reduction and a hysterectomy. So my whole torso is. And the hysterectomy was okay. The part that was the hardest for me was before, when I realized that I wasn't going to have my own children. Then I had, the crying part then. And then afterwards for the breast reduction, I went into it so super excited, and I was like, great, they're just going to help my back. That was mainly why I had done it, and be able to wear like normal clothes as well. But then afterwards, like I fell into such a depression over how my body looked. And I was like, wow, I did this to myself, kind of thing. And it just felt like kindergarten kids, when they're hacking up just felt like, something a kindergarten kid had put together with, construction paper or something, when I'm looking at the front of me, and I was like, wow, I didn't expect that part of it. And so those are our scars, if that can help you in your conversation, and I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing both of those. I have a way to kind of assess, like, how can you decide if the scars that are on your body are really causing impact or not?
Yeah.
And one way to just really easily tell is if you have a scar anywhere from like the tip to the tail, like the top of your head to your pelvic floor, it's going to be significant, because all of the important stuff is right there. That's where all of your organs are. That's where your breathing, comes from. That's where all of these energy centers are. If you have a scar on that area, it's incredibly impactful. And so we want to unpack that in a way that's appropriate to the person. Christine brings up a really interesting point about breast reductions, and I'll just take this as an example. Lots of women, like you were just describing, get a breast reduction and feel really good. They feel like they are themselves now because they can dress the way they want. They feel like they don't have that pain. It's almost like something shifted gears. And that sounds like it's something that you wanted, but because of, your own circumstances and how you felt through your own personal journey, you kind of had the opposite effect. And so that's why it's so important when you work with people holistically that you recognize that there's a human being in front of you, and you need to take their life into account. So the way that this all rolls out is incredibly individualized, and how you would work with a breast reduction scar would be really different to how you would work with a hysterectomy scar. They could be like very different dynamics. When you're talking about hysterectomy, you're talking about your fertility, your femininity, your like entrance or exit into a whole different lifestyle. Like you become a different person after a hysterectomy. There could be grief and sorrow and all of these different emotions that can play completely differently to a woman who had a breast reduction and feels like herself now, that she has like breasts that allow her to move and present herself and show up in the world the way that she wanted to. So all of these things absolutely are something to consider, but I'll just share just briefly an example of when people don't recognize that they have scars that are impacting. And this is really early on in my career, is a really good example of just, whoa, scars are super intense and we need to recognize and pay attention to them. I always say like two things: scars matter and every scar has a story. So appendix scars in general, from what I've seen, have a similar kind of story. And this was outlined really well in this example with this female client. If you have an appendix scar and you are a woman or a man over the age of like 40, 45, because if you're over that age, back in the day, they would leave you in the hospital overnight and you'd be without your parents. You were little, didn't really understand what was happening. And so when I started working on this appendix scar with this woman in particular, it was something that I could tell physically looked like it needed attention just by the way that it looked a bit like, gnarly and kind of wrapped into the body. But as I was manually working it and she was doing some breathing practices during it, she was telling the story of her experience around staying in the hospital, being afraid. And it was just like this eruption of energy and like intensity, like flew out of the scar. And she basically, burst into hysterics because she had this extreme recognition that, and this is across the board with people who have appendix scars of that age, is that there's an abandonment feeling going on. And that abandonment feeling that's birthed from that appendix scar event gets carried through people's lives, and they don't know why they have this story. And so when you start to trace these really important, meaningful things back to a scar, it's incredibly validating and so important that people understand, like, okay, I had this abandonment issue because this, and I can actually go to work, not just on the physicality of the scar, but working physically on a scar gives you like an awesome access point to just wrapped up, stale, kind of stuck emotion and energy that's within the scar. So when it comes out, it can come out in examples like that. That's a pretty extreme case, and I've learned to be a bit more gentle in like the way that we move through these kinds of things. But at first, I remember just being so shocked, and it was so powerful. It's like the room just exploded with all of that held tension from this woman who was in her 60s and had no idea why she was, feeling this flavor of abandonment throughout her life, and all the digestive stuff and all the other things that come with having a scar on your abdomen. So that's just an example, and really kind of piecing together the physical qualities as well as the emotional and energetic significance of scars and how to work them.
That is incredible. And what an excellent example. I mean, as soon as you said that, I thought of my son. One of my boys had to have his appendix out. I think he was like 13. And I had to leave him in the hospital. And I felt horrible for leaving him there. And I remember at the time his dad cracking a joke. And I'm like, this isn't funny. Like, don't freak him out, And I remember being so concerned about him. So I totally get how those emotions could be trapped in that scar. That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so significant.
Sorry, it reminded me of kids who go in for tonsils and eardrums as well.
Yeah.
People are left in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that it's so, I find when people are struggling with their mental health, their physical health, they're like, their emotions, they're feeling reactive, they're really like down and struggling through life, which, I mean, if we really get real, we're all struggling in some way.
Yeah.
Getting this kind of validation that there's an answer for what you're feeling is just such a beautiful start for people. It just takes the pressure off, and you go, oh, that's why I'm feeling that. And then even more so, I love to bring like the humanity, like the humanness piece, that we are all struggling, and we don't need to be pretending that we're okay. This is like one of the main problems of social media, as we all know.
Right.
But once we really get down to it and we can connect with that humanness, that we're struggling and that it's okay, and that I need to just work through something because I'm a human, I have the potential to grow and transform. That is really like the crux of the journey that I offer to people, and the mode at which we kind of have this transformation around is really the scar work, which is so much more than just the manual work, but it's a incredibly beautiful and inspiring process to go through with people, which is why I still continue to do it, because every time I'm like, that was amazing.
Yeah, it would be. Yes. Because it's like,
Yeah.
it's like doing the mindset work, right? And, you know, Christine and I have worked with people that are doing inner child stuff. They're going back to stuff from their childhood, and often, you know, dealing with trauma, that's where you're going. And this is almost seems like a shortcut. Let's cut right to your scars first, because let's clear that out of the way first. Let's deal with your scars. And like you said, dealing with the emotion surrounding how that, and helping them clear through that. It's like a shortcut. I love that. It's not a shortcut, but you know, from a coach perspective, I would think that's beautiful.
Yeah, in some ways it is. So I often tell people, and we're all more comfortable now, thank goodness, with mindset stuff and talk therapy and psychotherapy and guided, you know, meditations and inner child work. And the kind of maybe challenge with that is when we think that we've done those things, we can kind of check that problem off our list. But what my system is really trying to incorporate is that there's an embodiment piece, like a down and in, like a reconnection to places that you've been disconnected from. And anywhere you have a scar, there's disconnect if you haven't worked it. And so it's really like balancing really truly like the body and the mind. It needs to come together in harmony. So even if you've done incredible work in all of the things that we all know about, and I listed some of them, just getting into that scar and like physically giving your body input, bringing awareness back there, letting all that stuck stuff start to move, it's a whole different level of working with your body and working with that problem that is it's not really a problem. I always call scars transformation hotspots, because a lot of the time they're like these wells of transformation opportunity that most people have no ideas on their body. And so I want to just help people understand that the scars don't need to be a place where you're struggling or where you're challenged or where you know, the reason why you don't look at yourself in the mirror anymore when you walk by, which is really common for women who have hysterectomies or C-section scars. They just don't like the way that area looks anymore. It doesn't need to be like that. It can be a completely like flip that on its head and use that as a driving force through life, because we all are human and we all have the capacity to change and transform.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Have you ever come into any clients that have birthmarks? And would that be considered kind of a scar in the sense of transformation and stuff?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've gotten a lot of questions like, is a belly button a scar? And how do you work with that? Like all of these kind of things that can come up in the womb. And if we're talking about energetics and you know, the way that your mother is during the pregnancy and all the kind of stuff that can get packed into that situation, I really do feel like those are opportunities again to really transform some stuff that may be stuck inside of your body. So you can absolutely explore birthmarks, particularly if they are like large in size or in that area that I spoke about from the head to the pelvic floor. They would be interesting to investigate. And just the kind of energetic thought process, like a belly button is truly like your connection to like primordial Mother Earth.
Right.
It is like the gateway to mother, to nature, to the universe, however you want to say that. So there's a lot of cool ways that you can think about it when you are going through these processes.
That's awesome. I did in the last year, I don't know when it was, but I did a guided past life regression, and we were guided, you know, you could do it just yourself, or if you had a scar, we were guided to go into the past life that related to that. Sorry, not scar, a birthmark. And holy hell, what an amazing experience. It really, and like you said about transformation, I mean, it was really, in my case, I connected to the healer in that past lifetime of who I was and shone light on a situation in that lifetime, and was rewarded with, you know, beautiful energy gifts, and it just kind of helped me stand in my own power. You are a healer. You are this person. You are, you know, how you're supposed to show up in the world and everything. And it was absolutely a transformational experience for me. So, and that was a birthmark. I mean, I could, you know, I can totally see how this could be so transformational, for people, you know. And it's interesting because when Christine and I were talking earlier about the scars, and she was saying about her scars, and I was like, oh, you know, I never even thought about it, but I had 3 C-sections. I have a scar, but until she mentioned it, I'd never thought about it. So would you think, you know, as a person that deals in that, because it's not really something that's like, I don't attach anything to that. Like, I can't even think of anything negative, to be truthful. Like, how would someone like me benefit from services like you? Or in this case, do you feel like I've worked through that? And it's more of if you have a mental connection still or something, like, how do you tell?
Yeah, so I generally, when people have a scar on their abdomen in a C-section, for example, I list off a list of physical things that are very likely for the person to be experiencing. And in general, as soon as you have a scar on your abdomen, you have a pressure problem in your body, because your kind of intrinsic core, which is like your diaphragm on top, that ends up being your pelvic floor on the bottom, your abdomen in the front, and your back, you know, you're visualizing almost like this party balloon inside your body.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were to like deflate that party balloon and like start to rub on it, like start to pull and stretch where a C-section would be, and you blow that balloon back up, there's a weakening there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that weakening, that pressure problem, can absolutely be experienced as vulnerability in the low back. So like tweaky, kind of niggly low back, where you're like, man, I just picked up my bag and I just, you know, threw out my back. It could be that as a pressure problem. But because we're all connected, and you know, we're drawing a really big line, and in between, like inside this party balloon, is all of your digestive organs, all of your reproductive organs. For women in particular, we're also talking about the health of your nervous system. We're talking about the health of your digestion. So we're thinking like bloating, food intolerances, you know, challenges with inflammation and distension, incontinence, you know, fast digestion or fast bowel movements, slow bowel movements. Like, we start talking about this stuff locally, and then a pressure problem is actually the whole body. So you could be experiencing like a lot of congestion in your face. Like the pressure, once you start thinking about these words as not labels, like
Right.
I have this diagnosis, this and this, but we're talking about like a symptom of pressure, talking about seasonal allergies, sinus stuff, congestion, nasal drip, brain fog.
You're like talking my
Headaches.
language here. I was like, I'm just like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this way of describing people's problems is so much more clarifying, because you think like, oh, I have all these little micro things I got to deal with, and like I got to change my food, and I got to like, no, it's actually, you got to do one thing, and you got to work on the scar. You got to work on that area. So there's a physicality that comes with all scars.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important. But equally as important is the emotion and the energy. So that's why I always like to talk about this body-mind balance. So with each of your C-sections, each of those births, there's a different story. There may have been like challenges in like what you thought your birth plan was going to be and what actually happened. There can be like relationship dynamics that play out like during that birthing process. Lots of women feel resentment towards their like spouse or whoever's taking care of them in the moment. There's just, because you're freaked out, there's a layer of unknown and fear. And when we have that veil over in front of our eyes, we can start interpreting people's, you know, actions as different than what is. So people are often very upset and hold resentment or bitterness towards the medical staff, even if the medical staff had the, the biggest heart and the intention to help. But when you're in that place, it's like, it doesn't feel like that.
Yeah. I was
So
in a teaching hospital, and they were like, "Oh, do you mind if we bring in people, students and whatever?" That, I think they brought him in once. After that, I was like, "Get the hell out of my room," because it was like, I get that you're trying to learn here, but you're not learning on me. Like, it was just, So that's so funny when you say that. You kind of take it out on the people around you, but.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so there's, in the energy and the emotion, I'm always talking about it from 3 parts, because this is a lot more subtle than physical, because we like look down in our body and like, oh, it's right there. Or like, you can feel like, I'm bloated. That's a lot easier to like physically understand.
Mm-hmm.
But for some people, the energy and the emotion is kind of like this abstract, subtle thing. So the roadmap I want everyone to think about related to the scar is, what was your kind of feeling, your inner dialogue? What was your life like? What was going on before the C-section or before the scar? Were you stressed, strained? Were you feeling like, I don't think I can do this, I'm full of fear? Like any kind of, whatever's going on in your mind, as well as just the whole energetic signature of that period. Then during the birth or the event, there's always fear, especially if it's like a surgery, like a breast reduction surgery, because the medical staff will, rightly so, list out all the stuff that could go wrong. And that's like totally freaky. Yeah. So there's always fear involved in those relationship dynamics between who's taking care of you and the medical staff, like I mentioned. And then there's the after, which a lot of the time we just get told, like, this is just how you are now. You got to just deal with it. And that's not the truth at the end of the day. That's totally not the truth. So it is all of that, as well as the simple thing, like a woman doesn't look at in herself in the mirror anymore, which is really common for C-sections, or they're just changing their life slightly and they're like grooving a whole new path based on this scar. So we don't recognize it as being impactful, but it is. And it needs to be, it can be traced back and worked on. So your whole self-confidence, if it got depleted or kind of smashed because you don't like the way your body looks now, instead of just doing mindset stuff, or instead of just trying to boost your confidence from the now perspective, you want to go to the source of when it really, really got challenged, or when it really kind of broke or fractured. So in the example that you had given with the students, whatever kind of feeling that gave you, did that kind of get lodged or kind of condensed inside of you, and now you have a trigger? So lots of people who go to the hospital often really don't like going to the hospital anymore. They get really triggered because they don't trust them, or they have resentment from a past experience, or whatever it is, and then they live their life because of that feeling. So they completely change the way that they view the world and how they live in the world. So the more you can feel your story in the scar, it starts to really impact what could actually be going on and what kind of resolution you could be on your way towards.
Very, very cool. Because I can say that at this stage of my life, I deal with hip pain and low back pain. And a number of years ago, the medical system wanted to put things in my SI joints and all, and I was just like, no, I'm just not doing that. So I've chosen another way. I work with an osteopath personally, that helps, in a lot of ways. But I just find that very, very interesting, how really just unpacking what you went through. Because as you're saying that, I'm thinking about each pregnancy and each delivery and each, and how that was, and how very different each of them were. And the emotions behind each of them were all very, very different as well. So that's very, very cool. So now, because obviously you're also dealing with the emotional part of it, what about the physical part? Like, what, someone like me who has a C-section scar, can you get rid of that? Can you lessen that? Like, is that something that we should be, that is kind of something you're striving towards also, as well as releasing this, or is that even a factor?
Yeah, it's always both. And most often I start in helping people understand like the physical qualities that we're looking for. Because the physical, like I said, is like the tangible world. So if I just briefly do a like crash course on like the physiology of a wound, when there's like an opening to the external environment, the body doesn't like that because it doesn't want an infection. Because as soon as the body has an infection, it's like all systems on deck. It's all hands need to start to fight that infection. So it's going to close up as quickly as it can, and in a very irregular fashion, which actually we use to our advantage in my system, but particularly in the abdomen. And this is true for anywhere, but particularly in the abdomen, it's challenging because the scar, as it's healing, is looking for a solid, reliable, stable structure. So that as you move from your C-section, as you go to the bathroom, as you eat, as you twist, as you reach, the wound has to make sure that it's good to go for all of those vectors of movement, has to make sure that it doesn't reopen. So what is it looking for? It's looking for bone. It's looking for that solid, reliable thing that it can really anchor onto to make sure that it doesn't, get exposed again. So in the abdomen, that's a problem because it's really soft. It's all like soft tissue and organ. So depending on where your scar is, and for a C-section, it's going to go down. It's going to go down towards your pubic bone. It's going to go down towards your pelvic bones, also called your hip bones. And if you, for example, have really slow digestion, like you're just more on the constipated side, that means that your hollow organ that should be hollow is actually more often not. It's more often solid. So you can have scars starting to bury into the gut, like the large intestine, for example. If you're one of those people.
Uh-oh. Did we lose her?
This is really common. Are you still there?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Saying is if it can bear to large, but if who has a bladder that's you attend a lot of Zoom meetings, or this is really common for a teacher, then the scar tissue will start to latch and move into your, like, try to find that solid, stable anchor point, which is your bladder. So all of this creates a lot of challenge. And so we absolutely want to like remove that anchoring, give the body back the function that it's looking for, which is muscle stability and like the neurology functioning correctly, and take the heat off of the scar doing all the work, because the scar shouldn't be acting like a muscle, but it is. Because wherever there's a scar, the muscles underneath are not acting to their fullest potential. So there's a whole physical thing that is kind of my foundational work that I was really confident in the beginning, but through the process, I realized, whoa, there's a lot of emotion and energy that's stuck in there as well. So it was really like a physical thing that started out, and the example, like the appendix, it really became more than that over time.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I just all these scenarios playing in my head when you're talking and saying all that, and even other people, friends and family that and things that they've maybe gone through emotionally or physically and whatever, and just understanding that's incredible. So now part of your program to physically work with scars, what does that look like?
So my system, which is called Scars Reigniting Your Feminine, has 3 different pillars in it, which is growth markers, which is all around like understanding your baseline, like where you're at. Like when you had those like ping, ping, ping aha moments going like, I'm feeling all that stuff. Like we want to know like where we're at, so that we can move through that and see the change over time. It's your transformation, and you want to be on board with all of that, because that's the most important thing at the end of the day. As a clinical therapist, if I'm crossing off everything on my paper, but you don't know what's going on, it's not so great. That doesn't make any sense. So that's a really important pillar that I help like people understand, like how everything's connected. And like once we go through that, then we have progressive methods. So I have 6 body practices that I actually choose depending on the person, the situation, where the scar is, and all like the variables of the scar. So we have breathing practices, for example. We have self massage. We have different types of movement practices. I've developed a type of movement practice that helps to move and flush the fluid systems, like the lymphatic and the circulatory system. When you start moving all that scar tissue and all that stuckness, it needs to go somewhere. So I've found that flushing this style of movement really helps.
Yeah.
Then there's manual work, which is the obvious, like the touching one that everyone's probably thinking about. Then there's pelvic floor re-education and reconnection, because as a woman, we all got to go down and in and reconnect with that area, because it's just an area where there's so many reasons why we've disconnected and kind of detached and come up and out from the area. And then the final one, the sixth one, is helping women understand the power of their daily vaginal secretions, like their mucus patterns. You can see so much from your mucus patterns, like your stress level. It's not just, am I ovulating or not? There's also a ton of other information that we just never got the education on. And so I want to bring that in as well. So it's a really embodied experience, because in my own experience, and I don't know if you guys have had this as well, you can't just brain your way through life, because if you just mental your way through life, you'll just burn out essentially. So the process is really about coming back in and connecting.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that. And all of this you're doing and working with clients in on an online environment?
Yes. I have for so many years was in person, and then I spent some time in the UK and I started to work online, and then the pandemic hit and it was like really online. And a really great silver lining came from that, which was that I recognized how much more empowering it is when you have to do everything yourself. It's a very engaging, active process, because you're doing it and you're feeling the change. It's not me just going in with my hands and me feeling it. Like, you're totally on board with it. So it actually worked out really well. So I work exclusively online, and I work one-to-one. I have a 6-month program, and I also have a group program that's a year long.
I love that. That's awesome. And you're right, because working on yourself and teaching people how to do that work, even the touch part of it, on yourself, they would experience those emotions and that connection and, exactly what you said, that release in the end, right?
Yeah. 1,000 times more powerful.
Yes. Wow. I love that. So now I know you have a group on Facebook, and I believe it is also called the Radiantly Alive Woman. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my Facebook group. Yeah.
Perfect. And for the most part, the best way for people to get in touch with you is through your website that we have here on the banner, theradiantlyalivewoman.com.
Yep. So that's my website. You'll find all the information about my system, about the body practices, a little bit more about my story. And yeah, you'll also be able to find my community, the Facebook group, through that as well. Pretty easy to find. I think I'm the only Kendra Toothill around. And everything is the Radiantly Alive Woman on Instagram, Facebook, and my website.
I love that. And I love that name. It, after talking about your story and what you're doing to be of service in the world, that is such a beautiful title, and it just sums it up. It's awesome. I love it. Christine, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask? I know you've been sitting quietly.
Yeah. No, I just want to say thank you, and that we love your magic. Like, just what you're able to do for women and men who find you, I think is just so incredible, and never even thought about the emotions in a scar, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah, I'm sure we're not alone. Many people, I'm sure, I would never have made that connection in that way.
So cool.
Yeah. So awesome. I'm looking forward to watching more of what happens, and maybe picking up a few little tips myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. I go live twice a week inside my Facebook group, and it's so important to me that people have education as well as practical application. So there is tips and like how to move forward. There's lots of stuff in there. So yeah, that would be great if we just all start moving forward in a little way.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful. That is it. Thank you so much, Kendra. It has been an absolute pleasure having you with us here today.
Thank you.
We hope that you'll come back. I mean, I think we almost might move to 2 shows a month because everybody is just so awesome. We want to have them all back again. But thank you so much.
Awesome. I would love that.
Us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.